Sam Schneiderman, welcome.
Hello, Jesse.
Before we begin, before we talk about licensing or titles, can you tell me about the first moment that you saw a buyer get unintentionally harmed by how the system worked back before you were an agent?
That's my story. I mean, my wife and I were going out to look at properties, and this was in the Davis Square, Somerville area, and we would find properties that we liked. It was a hot market at that time, and Davis Square was just emerging, and we would go to look at the property. We'd think about it overnight. We'd get back to the agents the next day to tell them that we were interested, and they say, sorry, it was gone. Well, this happened 3 times in a row, and we realized it wasn't working so well for us. The agents were buying the properties if they looked good, and what was happening is we were getting screwed. So I got back into the car. I turned to my wife. I said, if you can't beat them, join them. I got my real estate license to protect myself. At that point, buyer agency was emerging on the West Coast, and I realized that sooner or later it would be here in Boston. So I worked as an agent for Century 21. At that point, there were no buyer's agents, so you had to be a listing agent. I was extremely uncomfortable working with buyers while not being able to advocate for them. And I realized that buyer agency was coming. Long story short, I became an appraiser for a number of years for banks. Buyer agency moved into Massachusetts, and I became one of the first buyer agents in Massachusetts.
So, were you an appraiser before you were any type of real estate agent, or were you a agent, appraiser, and then agent? Yeah.
Okay, so we went from consumers to being an agent. I became an agent for Century 21. I was trained by Century 21 as a listing agent, which was very interesting. And then I became a real estate appraiser and trained 40 appraisers in Boston. And then I became a buyer's agent because my heart has always been in working with buyers and sellers and protecting them.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about what that training was like for Century 21? Said it's very interesting.
Very uncomfortable because it's really about how you can control the buyer. Don't remember, the training was from the perspective of being a listing agent, and this is still the way a lot of this is done today, especially with the older school agents. The training is more about, well, I'm the listing agent, I have the house, and you're the buyer, and you need to behave. In fact, we just had a transaction
I was going to
where
say,
where the agent who's been doing this for over 20 years, right, behaved like we were doing him a favor buying the property,
yeah,
and as a result, we got our client out of the deal because
yeah,
it was so outrageous, and they wouldn't give in to anything that was realistic.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that was for me eye opening seeing an agent be so stuck in their ways, and
No,
thankfully our buyers found a better opportunity,
well,
and we were able to help them in that way by avoiding the situation.
exactly. It's more about manipulating the buyer and playing with their emotions in many cases, um, when the listing agent is trying to nail their feet to the deal and get them to the closing table.
Yeah.
And our job when we're buyer's agents is to make sure that our clients know exactly what's happening to them and what their options are. And in this case, to get back to that transaction, in this case, I mean, their option was get out and find something else that worked better. And we were lucky. We just closed on that last week.
Yeah.
They got a better deal downstairs, almost the same unit, and a cooperative seller.
Yeah, we're not really in the housing business, we're in the people business.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
at what point did you realize that this isn't about selling houses, it's about people's lives?
The moment I realized that was when I was sitting in the back room in the Century 21 office after I had gotten my training. I was working with my second set of buyers. I had to be representing the sellers because that was the only way to do that. But what we had back then was called sub-agency. So you had a listing agent who listed the house, and then somebody who worked with the buyers, but still represented the seller.
So the sub-agent still has a fiduciary responsibility to the seller?
Absolutely. So I would be in the back room with them, and that was basically the equivalent of the closing room. And I would say, so what do you want to offer on this house? And they would look at me blank, expecting me, because I had developed a relationship with them and we found them the perfect house, to give them advice. And I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So now they're just guessing at what it's going to take to buy the house. They have no history on the house, no information. And it was a game of, my job was to get them to pay the most money for the house that they possibly could. And that's
Yeah.
when I realized it didn't work for me.
We all know that online guesses, estimates,
Oh my God.
Redfin, what your house is worth type things. We all know those aren't perfect, but the internet wasn't even established to that point yet. So
Exactly.
where did the buyers get the information to figure out what they should offer on a home? Was it based on just the listing price and they
Mm-hmm,
had to
mm-hmm.
guess what a good offer was?
Absolutely. And back then we didn't have any, well, we had a computer. But basically everything came once a week in a book the size of a phone book, and that was your listing book. And we had what was the first generation of, I'm not even going to call them computers, devices that you had to pick this and put information in, and it would spit it back out in a manner that nobody could really get any data out of. It was listing by listing, so there was no information available. It all came through the agents, and all the agents controlled all of the listings.
Okay.
And at that point, they controlled all of the buyers. That was the uncomfortable piece of it, and we knew that because my own experience brought me to become an agent, and it was an
Yeah.
uncomfortable experience.